if you don't want to be left behind, you need to know where the ball is going rather than just knowing where it's right now. With that said, there were so many changes just in the last 12 months. So it's quite hard to stay ahead with what's coming up. So the next best thing without having a crystal ball is to talk to a futurist who actually can guide us a little bit to rethink what the future might look like, but then also helps us to bridge the gap between the now and then. And we are joined by a futurist, but also a transformational facilitator. Dr. Elissa Farrow is today's guest. Elissa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Petra. It's lovely to be here with you.
I'm so excited because what better way to kick off 2024 than talking about what's ahead? And with ahead, I don't mean just the next months, 2 or even 12 months, but the next 10, 20 plus years. And this is exactly what your specialization is all about. You're working with organizations and leaders to help them rethink what the future might look like, but then also help to build the bridge between, okay, this is what we want to be and are in, say, 20 years, but how do we act right now in order to make the change and the transition and get the people on board. And this is obviously a big undertaking. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of what you do and how you actually help your clients, but also how we can learn how to think like a futurist, we want to know, what is a futurist to start with and how do we become one?
What it's a great concept. What is a futurist? There's for many years, well over 50 years, there have been researchers, consultants, people inspired to sort of think beyond the typical 3 to 5 year planning horizon. And so the concept of a futurist was coined back in those early days to be a professional person, most often academically trained in a range of different tools, processes, and the mindset to be able to look beyond the obvious and also anticipate and scenario build a range of different futures that could actually occur. Why we would do that, not just for a fun degree of prediction, but basically to help us think and plan now, because what we do today will affect the future. And there's been many examples from industry, from our climate, to see decisions made which may have been right for the time, have actually left lasting impacts that now we and later generations need to try to resolve. So futurists aim to help make the planet and the world better.
I love it. And what I find so fascinating with your background is that you didn't start there. You actually started from the implementation side, from a project and change management, but now have also added the more futuristic strategy side of things, but then also connect the dots between the now and then. Give us a little bit of background in terms of how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, thanks, Petra. Well, my very first degree that I did was a Bachelor of Social Science. And so my first job after university was working in domestic and family violence prevention, doing counselling and information provision. So that was very much about sort of more like personal futures and public safety sort of concepts. And from there, I worked in government contexts, doing policy, running projects and establishing portfolio offices for a range of different government organisations. Part of that process was, of course, making sure that organisations could set strategy, but also do the change and adaptation approaches required to make those visions come to reality. So I spent a lot of my time, especially as a consultant in the last 10 years, training people in how to transform organisations, facilitating that sort of thought leadership process, but also building a bit of a bridge across from practical strategies that are about the today and implementation of projects, programs, and transformations today, but making sure that they bring lasting value, lasting benefits realization to organizations and the people that they serve, ideally.
And this is so tricky because we are getting bombarded with changes. There's a new platform or a new social media trend or whatever it might be popping up literally every second. So it's hard to stay on top of that. And at the same time, there is so much day-to-day stuff going on that we are so much in the trenches to put on fires, to not get sued, to, just keeping everyone happy. But then we need to think what's beyond that. You just talked about social climate change, for example, but then also, we see horrible floods at the moment in Queensland, and then we've got heat waves and so forth. Like we definitely see a climate change. And I was just listening just to go off tangent for a second this morning to a podcast, and they were talking about the hotter climates in Europe are changing the kind of professions people can actually do because it's too dangerous. So we are getting exposed to new kind of conversations and challenges that we've never seen before. And if you get us up to speed just in the last, maybe say 12 months or so, what have been the biggest changes that are impacting the way how we think and work and live and interact?
Well, I think if I stretch it back just a couple more years, but
Please.
back, Petra, is that I think one of the biggest impacts to people thinking about the future has been COVID and the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think blissfully everyone in, January 2020 was sitting there thinking, oh, it's another year coming, similar timing to this, when we're making this recording. And then suddenly within a few months, the world was totally different. And being in Australia, like it was a very different place, being an island and borders were closed and things changed. So that started to sort of change people's sort of view of the future, and also brought the concept of, well, what do we want our lives to really be like if theoretically our lives were maybe not as predictable as many people had thought, especially in a context like Australia, where we're blessed to be in a pretty safe context for many situations. Over the last 12 months, like I was in Dubai at an international project management conference around this time last year in 2023, and the biggest thing that everyone was talking about was ChatGPT and AI developments. That's been a massive shake this year that has affected many industries in both positive and potentially negative ways. I think also over the last 12 months, there's also been big shifts and changes, particularly in the fields around energy and energy utilization. And coming up soon, we've got mandatory targets around our ESG requirements that are really going to make organizations have to think seriously about how they do their delivery, but also maybe some aspects of their previous service models that maybe are no longer suitable given the regulatory and also consumer perceptions of what safe and clean actually mean.
Now that's already a handful. Like there's just so much complexity. And then, there are new conversations that we didn't have before. Like we're working remotely now, but I spilled hot tea over myself, I burned myself, but now I want to claim it as a work incident, but I'm at home. And leaders are perplexed. Like, I don't know the answer. Like I've never had that before. I can't even ask somebody else because they have not had it before. So we need to come up with new answers to new and more complex challenges. And this is just in here and now, but you're taking it a step further. You're actually working, especially with the more traditionally run organization, to rethink what their industry and their sector may look like in 20, 30 plus years.
Yes.
And how do you even go about this?
Well, I have a three-stage model that I love to bring people through. So firstly, I like to get people to be ready to think about the future. And in a lot of contexts, people are not necessarily wanting to let go of the present to even visualize what future or futures could look like. So I like to run an anticipation process that involves unlearning, opening, shifting mindsets to be more future and anticipatory focused, and then start to do a bit more of that dreaming process. So think about scenarios, including those that you consider to be the wild cards or the outliers, and have a great diverse group of people as part of the process. So leaders are wonderful people. I have many friends who are senior executives across many industries and colleagues, but sometimes they can't see everything. So we need to bring in a diverse range of voices and perspectives as part of that anticipation process, so that then leaders with the right information can assess what the right pathway is to try, experiment, learn from, and then potentially re-anticipate before we actually get to that adaptation process.
Well, that is challenging, but this is exactly what's required. There's a saying, if you want to have better answers, you need to ask better questions. And in the end, putting people into the right kind of mindset to reimagine what the education or the health system may look like. This is exactly what helps them to future-proof themselves, because we are seeing now 5 generations in a workspace. Everyone's got different expectations of what success looks like, or what retirement may be, or what career progression means. Not everyone wants to lead an organization these days or want to climb the ladder anymore. Work-life balance is a more important topic than ever before. Now, you're working across different industries, and maybe if we can also get a bit of a glimpse in your PhD. The topic of your thesis was all about how workplaces are going to be impacted or changed through AI. And AI is here and it's here to stay. And I think we have not even scratched the surface with what's possible. Can you give us some insights into your findings? How will AI change the way we work and live?
There is a multitude of different ways that AI could potentially change the way we work and live. One of the key themes and parts of my doctoral research was making sure that I heard the voice of the user, the end user, or those impacted by artificial intelligence, as opposed to the programmers or the software development companies. I wanted to hear from everyday people about what they would perceive to be the impacts. Some of those impacts that people felt, not just in the work context, but was that if there is a change to certain industries where potentially workers are replaced by automation of some degree, could be full replacement or partial replacement, what that would mean in terms of, for example, young people's opportunities to enter certain industries. So project management, for example, is a general profession that spans many industries. Gartner suggests that in 10 years' time, AI will be able to do 80% of a project manager's role. This may not
Crazy.
happen. It might not happen in all circumstances, but then what does that mean for someone who wants to become a project manager now? Like at the moment, the pathway into the profession, you start from the bottom and you do some good training and you get a good mentor or a good coach, like what I've been doing all of last year. And then you get experience and you learn on the job. But if AI is taking some of those functions, the experience in some of these roles will be quite different. So for me, the end user or the impacted person was implying that maybe it might even affect their families. It might even affect their ability to learn and have to retrain, or maybe even totally change the industry that they were part of. But again, these may be longer term futures, but I see more of a steady sort of change process in some sectors, but in other sectors, like what we've seen in marketing, for example, in content creation, things have shifted in those marketing and advertising contexts already, and the role of advertising and marketing specialists is now amplified, but it now is starting to make anyone able to theoretically do product development with the right AI tool that they're using.
And people say, but jobs are replaced by AI, and should we talk about the universal income and so forth? And at the same time, you're also saying, well, AI should enhance what we're doing. It changes the experience with that particular role. It doesn't replace the role, but the tasks associated with it. But then, if we think about it, it was so manually heavy. Any kind of jobs that we did, we put manually the data in. There was just a lot of manual handling, which can now be replaced. If we don't have to spend 40 hours, for example, to get a job done, what does it mean for the future of work? Will we have shorter work weeks? Will we have multiple roles across different industries? What do you think is the future of work?
Yeah, well, we're starting to see that trend start to come through already in the concept of a 4-day working week that has been trialed in many different organizations. What will also happen if there is unchecked change is that there may be forms of inequity start to form. So we sometimes make the assumption that everyone is digitally literate, and in some circumstances, people don't even in Australia have reliable internet, and AI tools do require data and energy to actually operate. So I think there needs to be a future where people will have artificial intelligence doing the parts of their role, dusty, dirty, dangerous, that maybe they do not want to do, but still allow people some hope and choice, so that if they want to be a creative person, if they want to do a manual role, that they still have the potential to do those processes. But big business and corporates and governments looking for efficiencies due to economic uncertainty will certainly be applying more of that economic lens. In my doctoral research, participants really wanted to make sure that the human was at the center of the value proposition.
And you also mentioned in the introduction that the value creation is probably changing, like the service that we're delivering as a business, but also as an individual, may change depending on what the world needs and the expectations on those different industries. Now, we were also talking about what the future of work looks like, but then the question is, what skills do I need to develop to stay relevant in this next world of work?
So for me, one of the biggest skills that people need to be able to apply is the ability to maintain more of a growth mindset, and to actually be able to learn, anticipate the future, be resilient, and also apply and amplify more of those sort of softer skills, the elements that AI won't be able to do, that personalized touch, the ability to communicate with a human in a human to human way. But then there'll be certain industries and jobs, of course, that will require that digital and AI savviness, because the machines theoretically will need to be maintained. They don't at this stage maintain themselves. And so there will be new roles and new industries, particularly in AI ethics, AI assurance, to make sure that we have good, safe, effective AI out there, and then that they're maintained and let's say controlled, being the word, effectively. What we don't want to have happen is a scenario where, if AI theoretically has sentience, which means that they think like humans do, that there is no AI theoretically checking on that AI, or no human assurance process checking that decisions are still accurate and ethical.
There are so many more considerations that need to go into a decision-making process. And one of the topics that we were also talking about is, how do you make a decision when you don't have all the answer? Like when we are reimagining what our company or our industry may look like in 2050, but then we don't know if it's true. We don't know what tools we've got available next year. How would you support your clients to actually make decisions right now that work towards this long-term future?
Yeah, well, part of the process that I use with my clients is to make sure that, first up, that they are very clear on the aspects and elements of their business that they do not want to change. So these elements of the business may be their values that they operate under, or it may be their customer service quality criteria, such as in aged care. Maybe that personalized touch is something that is essential to the way that you do your role, as opposed to in other aged care settings, maybe a robot can deliver your pills and people think that that's totally fine. Maybe it has to be a cute robot to do that delivery. But it's about making sure that, I think, first of all, we don't erode the things that actually are essential to our value proposition, and being really clear on that. And sometimes people that I work with, and clients and large organizations, we run typical values and behaviors activities, but we don't ever ask the question, what do we not want to change? And when I pose that question, that sometimes starts to set a little bit of the framing that then we can use as criteria to then reassess our future path. In one of my doctoral studies, participants came up with a set of ethical guiding principles, and those guiding principles are available for organizations to then turn into decision-making criteria to help them anticipate and assess the decisions and multiple futures and then make decisions. It's an incremental shift and change in many circumstances. That concept of the big bang change will be relevant in some industries who are willing and have the risk and financial profile to take those risks. In other organizations, it may need to be a slower, steady process
I'm so
with the
glad that you
right
mentioned.
guidance.
Absolutely. That you mentioned, what do we not want to change? Because people think, well, innovation, it means throwing the baby out with the bathwater and we're doing something completely different. And at the same time, this is also what scares so many organizations and leaders, that they don't want to lose the core of their business. But as you said, it's not a big bang change. It's about this incremental change. And this is also where I think your actual background comes in so handy, because you've been in change and project management prior to becoming a futurist, and know exactly what are the downfalls, why people are not getting on board and being part of the journey, and actually are sabotaging innovation. Now,
Mm.
and this is also what you are bridging now. So we reimagined 2050 as an organization, but then you also had people who come on the journey, incremental changes. What other aspects do you see are important for people to actually embrace the change and be excited for what's next?
I think one of the biggest things that I found in my doctoral research, and what I've found over years of working with people in either coaching processes, mentoring processes, or training groups of people in those processes, is the fact that many people are very resilient. We're all pretty resilient, but sometimes when things get a bit challenging, people forget the coping strategies. And so which is, I'm laughing, but it's actually something that sometimes all it takes is someone to be reminded that they've got many strengths, and what some of those coping strategies are, to remain well and to remain able to shift and adapt. The best workplaces that I'm so proud of is when they've actually established ways that their practices, or their communities of practice that exist within their organization, have not just sort of let's call it the harder sort of tactical type of conversations, but also the conversations that actually mean that there's heart and care as part of the culture of the organization. So people are encouraged to learn, encouraged to share their learnings in a very active way, encouraged to potentially even experiment within the confines of safety, a safe space to do so that won't theoretically end up on the front page of the internet news. And that culture then of learning and growth and sharing and collaboration, which cuts across and up and down layers of an organization, mean that they can together move forward. No one is left behind, because people actually care about their teammates. They care about their leader. The leader cares about their peer. The leader cares about the person who might be the newest entrant to the organization. Yeah. So that resilient culture, and also a strong concept around risk and assurance on the side. So there's like both the sort of enabling and the constraining sort of aspects, is what organizations require. We need assurance, we need ethical thinkers, but we also need our own ability to be well, to be resilient, and to be able to cope with the changes that will be coming, not just from organizations, but also from the planet. As you said in the beginning, like floods at the moment in Australia, fires, like global conflicts, geopolitical pressures, an earthquake recently in one of our nearby countries. Like, all of these things do require at the core people to feel that sense of community, but also have a degree of resilience collectively.
Absolutely, 100%. And this brings me
Mm.
to my next question. When we talk about learning, like, there's one thing to learn within an organization from and with each other, but then at the same time, what is the future of education? Because the current education system doesn't prepare you for resilience or for this. Yes, we're critical thinking now as part of the curriculum, but you learn models rather than the application. So that the effectiveness is questionable again. But you're a trained academic, like you've seen both worlds. Where do you see traditional education going?
The future of education, I am seeing at the moment, even in Australian settings, with my friendship group. I've got people who have their young children in a range of different educational models and examples. So there's examples of like bush kindy. There's examples of homeschooling. There's examples of sort of formalized sort of educational institutional type schooling processes. And so I think through those models, it's about making sure that children have the ability to sort of think not just laterally, but also that they can think in that more holistic concept, and they know that it's more than about STEM and skills for the future. It's also about making sure that they've got the coping and communication ability to be able to move to that future. I had the joy recently of being a judge at a Queensland education STEM competition for primary school children. So these kids would be probably about 10, 11 years old, and I was judging the technology process, and these young kids were incredible with their ideas that they came up with for apps and other developments that were all about solving a problem that they saw in society. So programs like that actually mean that they have to apply and learn and problem solve and do it in a team, really, I think, add to the sort of formalized curriculum approach. And that's the future.
Absolutely.
The future
Yes.
of education will be learning in circles, learning, and theoretically, which is why people are moving to bush kindy, or they're moving to other alternate forms of education, is because of a degree of dissatisfaction with the current process, and wanting for parents, when they're in a position to take back a bit of that more organic learning process that has been lost. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so much debate around the effectiveness of the recall, because this is how we got judged. What is 1 + 1? 2. Now you repeat it. So whatever somebody said or you read or learned, you just repeat it. But nowadays we can't compete with rehearsal of knowledge, and that could even be outdated. So I like that you said it's not just about the lectural thinking or the very traditional thinking, but also taking different aspects in consideration. And in the end, they are the future leaders. And this is also an area that you are ingrained with. You're preparing the next generation, not just the actual young generation, but also existing leaders for this next wave of work. What are, you mentioned skills overall, but in terms of a leader, how do we prepare for this hybrid workspace where we also have to maintain machines, where we have to take floods and other weather conditions in consideration? How do we go about that? Sounds very complex.
Yeah. Yeah, I have written about the future of leadership, and also a number of different aspects of leaders of the future, and one of those dimensions needs that they need to challenge the traditional concept of what power means in a leadership concept. So lots of organizations, there may be a degree of hierarchy. Leaders have a certain sense of obligation and accountability, which comes with the legal structure that they're part of. But in the future, we may have artificial intelligence being a leader of humans. And that was one of the wildcard scenarios that I explored in my doctoral research. That makes people feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes about, no, I'm not going to take a direction from a robot. What do you mean? But really, leaders in the future need to be AI savvy. It doesn't mean they have to be programmers, but they need to be comfortable and informed themselves. And that would be what we have to do today, is that leaders need to start to understand, well, what is this actually all about? Like, I don't have to do a degree in AI, but I need to understand what I need to do to make sure that I can keep my accountability clear. if I'm blindly going to accept the decision that comes out of an AI instance, that is not a good leader of the future. A leader of the future needs to be able to understand AI's place, but also make sure that the information that enters these algorithms is clean, clear, and is something that doesn't mean that it's corroded information that will come out because it's corroded or biased information that goes in. The other aspect of leadership is about embracing new forms of diversity, which I don't think leaders at the moment in all circumstances and in all countries embrace diversity well at the moment, which is really unfortunate. It's 2024 and there's still sexism and racism and other forms of major bias that exist within workplaces. However, in the future, you might have AI or robotic colleagues, and that sort of starts to change. What does it mean when we've got like a hybrid workforce where we have humans and AI working together? And these, again, outlier ideas, but things that when we start exploring these in workshops and processes, it gets people to think, think a bit beyond the obvious, think a bit like, well, what would we do in that circumstance, and start then to shift our thinking a little bit about the now.
And it all starts there, to push yourself out of the comfort zone with thinking what could be the case. Like when we had our strategy day and we talked about the future leader may be AI, and I just looked at you weirdly, and then you said, "Oh, you've got a smartwatch. You're already kind of controlled by it." It's like, "Oh yeah, she's got a point," because you're right. It remembers stand up, move, do this, do this. Like, yeah, I'm coming, but this is in the end, instructions. But and this is where accountability and responsibility comes in. I can choose to respond, to get up or not. And when we shift
Yes.
gears a little bit in terms of ethics in AI and responsibility in AI, that's a completely new topic. There are biases because in the end, AI puts out what somebody puts in. So it needs to come from
Yes.
humans. But what's your take on AI ethics and responsibility in that space?
Yeah, I encourage people when I did a presentation recently to a global organization, a keynote process. And one of the lasting things that I talk about is to make sure that you first of all start with what are your ethical guardrails as a person. So sometimes people don't think about that or talk about it, but I encourage everyone, what is yours? So Petra, what is your ethical guardrails, the things that you value? And then in an organizational setting, we've got to sort of amplify that out a little bit and start to bring in policy and positioning statements about what does it mean for us even to utilize AI as part of our work? What are our guiding principles so that when we're engaging with vendors or suppliers or creating our AI instances, that we're sticking to what our principles are, which hopefully are based on the human and the planet at the center of the process, as opposed to economic all the time. So ethical policies. Thankfully, there's a number of professional associations, including IEEE, that are creating international standards around AI ethics. A number of other professional associations are starting to have positioning statements. This year, many organizations, due to ChatGPT suddenly being so easy to access, had to respond with, well, what does this mean? And don't put your confidential ministerial brief for a grammar check in ChatGPT. Like things that most of us would think, why would you even do that? But people are going, oh, easy, grammar check, I don't have to think, blah, blah. But we have to start thinking about safety and security. And that's where the ethics comes from. But have a deliberate conversation in the leadership team about, well, what are our views? What's our ethical position? It doesn't have to be a legal conversation, even though legalities will come into it at some point. But what's our ethical position of the things that we want to hold dear, but also make sure that we encourage in our staff and our decision-making processes?
And I think this is another complexity that leaders are facing. It's not just about the profitability, which used to be the one metrics of success, but now it's profitability and planet. So it's another level of complexity that we have to take in consideration what or how we create value as a business or as an industry. Now, to wrap the conversation up, you also in your focus, it's about equity, it's about sustainability. Now, with equity, you said before, not everyone's got access to internet to start with or to energy. So that's creating a little bit of gap already. And at the same time, there are so many jobs like um, frontline workers. They cannot work remotely, but then at the same time, we want to work remotely. We want to have more work-life flexibility. How do we create this equality as a leader, as a business? How do we go about that?
And I think, first of all, it's beyond standard employee policies that exist at the moment, because they're not always effective about bringing diversity of people with disability into workplaces, or different proportions of women, or other sort of sectors, and other people in that great diversity of LGBTIQ into the process. We need to think about, first of all, knowing that we are one humanity on this planet. In the future, there might be requirements where people, like what we're seeing in various parts of the world. In Europe, there's a lot of movement of people due to challenge and hardship. And so from an equity perspective, we've got to make sure that at minimum, people have a base level of connectedness if the world is heading to more and more digital spaces. One of my clients, they do a lot of work with people with disability, and during the pandemic, they actually had sponsors who provided devices to people with a disability and their families who didn't have a smartphone, and that was the only way in some circumstances to get information. They run digital literacy processes involving peers who are people with a disability themselves teaching other people. It's that process that can be amplified in many other industries to get the base digital literacy down, the base access or donation of data, and also make sure that we check those customers in finance. For example, my mum, who knows that she gets mentioned a lot in keynote presentations, but mum's not very good at her basic little phone, which is a little push button little phone, but she doesn't have a smartphone, she doesn't have an email address, she's 81 years old, and so there's proportions of our society who will never really want to be on the grid. So we have to make sure that there's ways for people to respond, or those communities will actually form their own way of transacting, which we're starting to see coming back now with different people's use of cryptocurrency, for example, whole other communities who are still going back to bartering or using time as a currency. It's quite an interesting part, but it's got to be one of those ethical guardrails about equity. And I encourage all organisations to make sure it's not just lip service, that it's actually something that really is a commitment, because that social value is huge if we all work together and embrace the diversity and beauty of our community.
Yes, absolutely. Now, we've covered so much ground, and I think it's safe to say that we're not getting bored anytime soon. There's enough challenge and complexity that we have to handle. But what's your mission for 2024? What are you working on? And of course, how can we learn from you, connect with you, and engage with you?
Yeah, so my focus this year is about increasing futures literacy, and also increasing the ability for organisations to anticipate the future, assess the future, and then adapt appropriately to that. So I'll be producing a number of different accessible products and speaking. I've got 2 international conferences that are lined up already, where I'll be speaking about that exact process. I'll also hope that for me it's a healthy, happy and sane year, and one where I still have time to commit to the volunteer pursuits I like to do, such as surf lifesaving on beautiful Minjerribah, North Stradbroke Island. So yeah, that's a bit of a focus, but I'd like to make sure it's a good, nice, balanced year. And but yeah, lots of fun and lots of new insights. People can find me via LinkedIn and also my website of drelissafarrow.com. And yeah, we'll see how we
Lovely.
roll from there. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Farrow, thank you so much for all your insights, the work that you're doing, and simply challenge us to think differently, because this is exactly how we can stay ahead. So what better way to start the new year than with this conversation? Again, thank you so much, and very excited to see how you will impact the futures.
Thank you, Petra.